Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IntraCultural podcast. I'm Missy.
And I'm Lucy, and we're two anthropologists that co-founded a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging firm, and we're called Willing Observers.
So, this is the IntraCultural podcast. It covers a range of topics and answers common questions that can be better understood using the concept of culture. So, how are you doing today, Lucy?
I'm okay. I slept yesterday when taking melatonin when I woke up in the middle of the night from anxiety. So that was nice. Yeah. I found something that worked.
That's good. This is where we all exist now. It's where we all exist now.
How are you?
I am enjoying my fourth caffeinated beverage of the day. So I did sleep in a little, got a full 6 hours last night. That's
very impressive. So you're operating on 3 more hours than you usually do.
That is accurate.
Oh my God. People listening must think we're very overwhelmed, stressed, overworked. Well, all true statements.
All true statements. And we preach a lot of, wellness and self-care, but do what we say, not what we do.
Apparently, you cannot provide those benefits to contractors. We learned very recently.
Apparently, we're incapable of providing them for ourselves.
But we tried.
We tried really hard. To add to everyone's stress, let's talk about the elimination of DEI programs.
No. Okay.
Okay. So today's topic, we're going to talk a lot about it's in the news. In addition to the federal DEI programs going away, we see a bunch of private companies very publicly saying that they're getting rid of their own DEI initiatives or rolling back DEI. And there's been a consumer movement to boycott organizations that are anti-DEI. So we wanted to put something together as consumers are making their choices about their spending to kind of raise some issues that you might consider while you're thinking about your spending habits with these DEI rollbacks in private companies. So our question for the day is, should I participate in anti-DEI boycotts?
Meaning, should I boycott companies that are removing DEI from their public image, statements, program naming, etc.? I will say, interestingly enough, I recently got a new therapist, and she asked me what I did for a living, and I told her, and she said, "Can you send me a list of all the companies I should be supporting because DEI is so important?" And I was like, wow, I've never had this kind of relationship with a therapist before. So it reminded me I need to send that list.
Yes. And we also decided to record this podcast in this order because I in every space that I'm in, anytime I enter that space, this has in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, this has been the question that I get almost immediately is either a question about this consumer boycott or a statement from someone telling me that they are participating. And so it seemed like a good time to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also maps onto a lot of other boycotts that are going on. Like there's immigrant advocates that are boycotting certain companies because of their stances on immigration, like Coca-Cola, Starbucks, etc. So a lot of people are holding firm and standing by boycotting this presidential cycle.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to just talk through a few things that we think you should keep in mind as you are making your consumer spending choices. If you are making consumer spending choices, because I do want to take a second to acknowledge that that is also, right, it comes from a point of privilege too, to be able to make those consumer spending choices. And we fully support those of you who can do it, and want to let people know that if you can't make those choices, that you should not feel bad about it. But this is one avenue of activism for folks. So here are some things that you can think about as you're making those choices.
Yeah. I will say I have been saving a little bit of money by holding firm until I get home to buy coffee. So that's been nice money in my pocket.
Yeah. So I think the first big thing to consider is the overarching like perception of what companies are saying publicly versus what they are doing around DEI. So there are a number of lists that have already been generated about the companies that have very publicly said that they are dropping DEI in some or all capacities. And we're going to link you to a few of those articles and those lists in the show notes. But what are they saying versus what are they doing? So, what are some things to consider? And so, it's probably right, safe to assume that some of them, all of them, right, many of them are getting rid of DEI as, I don't know, a show, right? Public perception, because they don't want to be targeted by the Department of, wait, I can't even say it, Justice. If you're not listening, I'm doing air quotes, the Department of Justice, who might be coming after private entities. But
Mhm.
does that mean that they're getting rid of all of their DEI programs and initiatives and goals? Probably not.
No.
No.
And I think this also reflects what we've been seeing with our clients, right? Like I think we talked about it on previous episodes that even though they are really strong advocates of DEI, they're changing to focus culture or focus engagement, community, and those terms. And we have said on previous episodes that just because they're doing that rebranding, it doesn't mean that they're doing any less work. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like today.
Mm-hmm. So that is step one. If you're thinking about holding back your spending, one thing to consider is, what are they saying versus what are they doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have some companies who are publicly saying that they're dropping their DEI initiatives, but at the same time, simply, they're kind of flagging that they're rebranding. They're not actually dropping what they're doing. They're keeping it and calling it something else. And I'll bring up the controversial example of Target. And so Target has publicly said they're getting rid of their DEI programs, and as pointed out to us in one of our fantastic contractors found a great article, and Target might be publicly getting rid of it, but at the same time, their CEO said that they are very committed to, quote, investing in people and creating a culture of care and growth, end quote. So, public dismissal, but that signals to me a rebranding of what they're doing rather than an actual eradication of fully of their DEI kind of programs and initiatives.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And by contrast, I mentioned earlier people that want a list of what are the pro DEI companies. I see on LinkedIn every so often those lists come up. Like here are the companies you want to support who are pro DEI, but the framing of it is misleading, right? So just because they're saying they're pro DEI doesn't mean other companies are necessarily anti DEI. So I think that's important to note. And one of the lists I recently saw, which will be in the show notes, is like over 150 companies that are really popular, right? Adidas, 7-Eleven, what is T-Mobile, South Southwest Airlines. They have been still saying that they're going to keep DEI in there. in their language of their initiatives. But it's also important to note that just because they say they're pro DEI, it doesn't mean that they're also flawless in their execution of DEI. I spent a little bit of time before this recording to look up which ones had gender discrimination lawsuits or race-based discrimination lawsuits and labor law violations. And you would not be surprised that a lot of them do. So it's a tricky case, right? Those that are pro DEI are not like innocent or pure companies, and those that are not on that list might be doing things that are pro the values of DEI.
Right. So something to consider as you are deciding where to spend your money, that, that just stating I am pro DEI doesn't mean that you're doing the work, and taking the words DEI off of everything doesn't mean you are not doing the work. So what is most important to you as a consumer? Is it companies that are still trying to do the work, or is it companies that say that they are committed? And so that is a point of consideration. And this might be a good time to talk about some of the reasons that companies are rebranding.
Well, that's before we do that, I want to say that there are companies that are totally jettisoning DEI. They're completely like getting rid of them. And so we're not talking about those companies who know that they probably hired a DEI person for show. Like that's how you know that their DEI was not actually a legitimate incorporation into their business, is when they can just so easily get rid of it. Because if you do have DEI embedded in your organization, it's really difficult to just suddenly get rid of it from one day to the next, unless that person was just like a token individual occupying some role, twiddling their thumbs most of the day. And I have met those DEI professionals who are absolutely bored out of their minds at their jobs collecting a paycheck. So that is also a possibility. But to Missy's point, how are companies speaking about DEI when they're rebranding? That says a lot about what actions they're taking.
Yeah. So if companies are rebranding, and so now we've given you this like confusing soup, right? You're like, this is great. I am going to do this activist work because this company has jettisoned it and this company has kept it. And now we have confused you more. So you're welcome. That's what we're here for.
Do that.
Yeah.
Very well.
We're just here to make it more complicated. But so things to look for here is just thinking about, one, as Lucy noted, if DEI is embedded in an organization, really embedded, that probably means that there was a certain level of commitment to it already. And there's not going to be an easy walking back of all programs. And so that is one way to know that, if there isn't just one person, but there's just a wider array of initiatives and programs that organization has, then that's something to look for, to know that might be a company that's doing the work, whether they call it DEI or they call it people and culture, or they call it a culture of care and growth. That's something to look for. Right? Is it embedded throughout?
So what are the names that we have heard, Missy, about what they're rebranding to? I know culture, I know engagement, and community. We talked about community before. Are there other words that people should look out for in the rebranding?
Belonging.
Oh yeah, obviously belonging.
Yeah, there's a lot of rebranding around belonging.
Respect.
Yes, respect and civility. A lot of things that are like people centered. So that's why I think why community and culture are some of the terms that have been kind of targeted for rebranding. But another place to look for terms is, and without getting to the weeds on this, is just thinking about the kind of more international metrics. So things that fall under social or society oriented programs for businesses that are participating in UN goals, and that are doing corporate social responsibility work, which has a whole bunch of history of red flags. But the S in society, right, is some of them are pulling it into these other places rather than having it as an independent program because it kind of gives it some shield.
ESG too. You
Yeah.
mentioned CSR, environmental, social, governance.
Governance and
Yeah.
governance. Yeah. And that's the UN related kind of metrics and programs fall under ESG.
hmm The other term that I just remember I saw was inclusive growth.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Doesn't that sound fancy?
Yeah. There was it wasn't for a while, inclusive excellence was another one.
Oh, yeah, that's the one a lot of higher ed uses. I think they might still use it,
Mm-hmm.
inclusive excellence. But even the inclusion, that's also under scrutiny under the DEI because it's part of the three-letter acronym.
Yep. Yep.
But
Those,
uh-huh.
no, go ahead.
Oh, but I was going to say the growth part really emphasizes it as an economic imperative
Mm-hmm.
compared to saying it's for a social or equity reason, that it's because it's good for business. So I have seen people in organizations emphasize the business case more.
Yeah, which is right, important if we're kind of going to a place where we have to re-emphasize the importance for business in the world, in addition to emphasizing the importance for humans in the world.
Yes, but that brings up the other point that this actually lines up squarely with critiques of the business case that say when your market doesn't need DEI, then there will be no DEI. And we have definitely seen that for companies like Tractor Supply, who claim that their consumers don't need DEI, so they got rid of it entirely. So what do we say to that, Missy?
Oh, we say that's great. That's fantastic. But because, part of the business case of DEI is also you have to have people in your organization who are different be able to work together in a way that is innovative and productive. If you jettison DEI and in name and in practice, then your organization will probably stagnate because internally it won't be functional. So, cheers to
Um,
anybody that's really getting rid of this because it's really going to be bad for business unless you want your business to remain stagnant and small and not international.
or at best, at worst, like good luck with all that conflict you're going to have because I'm sorry, not all conflict is managed by human resources. You have to also want to prevent conflict as well. If
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a successful business, part of it is preventing, not just addressing the fire when someone complains to HR.
Right. And and I think we've mentioned this already, but it's worth reiterating. The way that diversity ends up getting framed in all of this doesn't acknowledge the many ways that humans are different because humans are diverse and humans are different in many different ways. So this whole attack doesn't capture what the actual fundamentals of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging programs are there to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, should is also shows what kind of attack it is if it's targeting certain groups of people without recognizing the many different ways that humans are diverse in the world.
Yeah. I'm sure that Tractor Supply doesn't only hire one type of people, but even if they did, you can make the case that personality differences are diversity.
Right.
So they're all not going to be robots with
No.
one personality, one tendency, one point of view, one perspective. Even if you were to take out race and gender and all the other important differences, you're still
Mm-hmm.
going to need to figure out how to have a productive organization.
Right. So, I think another point that I get, not shift, but go back to this kind of idea of, is there value in taking this kind of public stand of saying, I'm not jettisoning my DEI? Because I think that's something that people are responding to. And I want to say, like, well, yes, right? There's value in that. And it would be really great if, like, all of the Fortune 500 stood up together and were like, no, right? We're not doing this. But we do know that, like, that didn't happen. So, how are we navigating these waters? And before we completely vilify all of the private entities that have gotten rid of DEI, how can we think about their relationship to each other? And, some have federal contracts, others don't. Some have more of a stake in this kind of rebranding work than others. And again, we're partitioning out the I don't know, the Tractor Supplies of the world, those who are just jettisoning DEI to jettison DEI. But for the organizations that are rebranding or moving things around, like, what are some other considerations that we have there for thinking about how those organizations relate to each other?
Yeah. And not just federal contractors, but even subcontractors, right? Like those that don't have direct contracts with the government, but they might do contract work for someone else that does. So it's actually a pretty big, wide amount, broad number. I don't know what the right word is there, but it's a lot. It's a lot of companies. I did sleep last night and here I am, my brain. Side note, my sister and I were watching TV last night. I was so tired. I was setting up my old phone because she just broke her phone. She was like running across the street and then it fell out of her pocket and a car ran over it. It was very, very tragic. But thankfully, Missy and I got business phones like not that long ago. So I kept my old phone. So I was wiping it so I could give it to her. And she asked me if I'm paying attention to the episode. And I said, yeah, I just need to fix it. And she's like, fix what? The episode. She's like, what? I had no idea what I was trying to say, but fix the episode was not what I was trying to say. So that's where my mind is lately.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I think that is really good for the clarity of the podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone. Sorry. At least you have an explanation.
Good explanation. But
sorry, going back to the topic.
No, it's important to understand that, like, the companies that have more power to make public statements right now, and they're making their own decisions about their business goals and their social goals and their responsibility to their employees and their communities. But there are companies that are smaller, that are more tenuous, that are more dependent on federal contracts. And that's something to consider too, if you're thinking not just the really big, big box companies that you're investing in or divesting from, but, how are you considering smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses that might, not survive not getting the federal contracts unless they do that work of rebranding. So the companies themselves kind of have their own hierarchies of, like, they're privileged to speak out and they're privileged to, to make public statements and do that kind of public pushback. So that's also kind of in the mix of thinking about the boycott.
Yeah, we had a really good meeting with one of our clients maybe 3 weeks ago. Time is a blur, but they emailed us and they said, can we get some time on to this week? Because we have to really think about, we are getting pushed to rebrand. So we obviously, our client said, this doesn't change anything. We're still committed. We're still moving forward with everything we've been discussing, but we do need to rethink the language that we are using. And so we met and there was like 5 or 6 of us, Missy and I included. And, everyone in that meeting is really passionate about it and is really upset that they have to not use the term diversity anymore. But realistic in the sense that, without saying who this company is, they have clients that are very open Trump supporters, and they have contracts with that are directly tied to federal money. So they know the reality of the situation. If we're really gung-ho about keeping the term, We're going to make a lot of waves. We're going to lose out on a lot of money. And they're experiencing growth at this moment. That's one of the reasons they hired us last year or 2 years ago, is that they're experiencing a lot of growth and they're kind of all over the place because their culture is inconsistent and incoherent. And they're going to not be able to afford paying people's jobs that they just gave if they were to say, screw the executive orders, we're going to do whatever we want to do. So we're still in conversations, but this is one of the first times that Missy and I brought this up. It is a privilege to be able to say we're keeping DEI. It is absolutely a privilege. And if companies really care about their employees, they're not going to make that statement lightly. They're not going to say, let's get rid of let's keep DEI when they know that people's jobs are going to be on the line if they do that. Right. So I think that rebranding could come from a very good, well-meaning place. And it does have consequences and impacts that we're seeing, including potentially getting on a boycott list.
Right. And I think we want to make sure that kind of consideration gets out there, because that's something that we haven't seen a lot being reported on in the creation of all of these lists and in like the commitment to these kinds of boycotts is like, thinking about all of the kind of considerations that go into this in terms of the companies themselves and like the commitment to their workforce and what they're trying to do versus what, that first point, pay attention both to what they're saying and what they're doing, rather than simply going with this headline that they've jettisoned X and then that's it.
And it might be hard to see what they're doing, right? If you're not in a role like us where we can see them and have these conversations with them on a regular basis. But if it's a well-known company and you're curious as to what their stance is, you can probably find a little bit on Google and just find like what's been going on with them. Like Missy, you brought up the example earlier of Target, like are they president or CEO?
It was the CEO statement. So like, what is the CEO saying publicly?
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of public statements are being made? Did they get rid of their employee resource groups, or did they just call them something else? Right? There's enough reporting, I think, out there, especially about the big companies, to be able to get a good sense of whether they're actually getting rid of DEI or if they're calling it something else. And as far as the companies that have DEI in their name, as Lucy said earlier, the consideration of what they're actually doing can also come from looking at their public statements, what their CEO is saying, and their public commitment to their own kinds of internal programs and resources, because that will give you a much better idea of kind of triangulating what they're doing rather than simply going by, headline A versus headline B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good points. LinkedIn is also a really good source of information for that. I've seen tons of people post about the rebranding that they're doing, and they're, making public statements that they're still proud of the company for continuing to do the work. So I've seen things like that. So don't just trust the list flatly at face value. Because like I said, I think I mentioned one of the ones earlier that Starbucks is on the pro DEI list, but they're being boycotted right now because of immigration, their stances on immigration. I don't know if the boycott's still going on, but they were last time I checked. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to know that these are not just single issues. DEI is not just a single issue, right? And that it is a lot more complicated than that. And also these companies are huge. They're so big, a lot of them that are on these lists, that even though they might be pro DEI and keeping DEI, something might have happened in some location, in some place, that now they're experiencing a lawsuit and they have to handle that too. So it's complicated.
Very complicated. And even if with all of this to that point, if they are on like a pro DEI list, no company is perfect. And they're all going to have some type of, as if they're big enough, some type of internal issue to consider too. So, have we complicated it enough for everyone, Lucy? Do you think? Have we made it complicated enough for everyone?
It just reminds me that anthropologists do that thing of complicating things and
Mhm.
then and then showing some clarity around something. So that's why we do this, everyone, because that is what we are trained to do.
That's it's reminding, I teach a class on modernization, and I come
Mhm.
into it the very first day and I ask everybody what their definition of modernization is, and everyone has a very clear definition. And then I tell them that my entire goal is to make them more confused. So that at the end of the class, that if I feel like I have achieved something, if they leave the class not quite knowing how to define it when they came in with a sure idea of how to define it.
I really like that. I
Mhm.
will teach you how to be confused. Actually, that, that's really good actual critical thinking skills, because once you can see the different dimensions and perspectives of an issue, that actually makes you more emotionally intelligent and more attuned and a deep thinker when it's hard to come up with an easy answer.
Yes. So you're welcome, everyone. So the question that we asked at the outset, we didn't answer it. Should you participate, and where should you put your money or not put your money around this DEI boycott? I hope that we have now made it more confusing for you.
That sounds like the conclusion. It is not the conclusion. We are still talking.
Well, what is our solution for all these folks that want to participate?
Okay, so what I would do first is, if it's a pro DEI company, that sounds great. If you really like them to begin with and they're on that list, great. I would still become educated on what else are they doing? What are their stances on all the other issues that are important to you and that affect people's livelihoods in the United States. So I'm still sharing those lists. Those lists are useful to some extent. But if they're not on that list and you care a lot, then do a little bit of investigation on your part and see what they're doing. You can also email them. I think I would email them too. Like if they're a smaller company and there's nothing online about them, probably they have some public facing document
Mhm.
where they stand on their employees, on engagement, on community. And if they don't have any document at all, that means they're not doing anything at all. Because when they are doing stuff around that they're using it for recruitment, they're using it for retention, they're using it for marketing, for branding, etc. So if you ask for it and they don't have it, it's because they have never done it. And that is your answer.
Yeah.
What else? What else
I
would you do,
think
Nancy?
I think we've already talked a little bit about like that this research, like, that you have members of these organizations. I think, Lucy, you brought up LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is a really good resource because you'll have representatives that actually work within the company that are saying things about what's happening in the company on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a really good resource. Another place to look is thinking about whether or not and to what degree they participate in the social part of the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance. So like I haven't seen this walk back yet, but I'm sure it'll be walked back. Since last year, the SEC requires U.S. companies of a certain size to report ESG metrics. So there will be some of this reporting out here, at least for the last year, for companies of a certain size. So there you'll actually get some sense of what people are doing around the S, right? The social. But the other thing is, like, they might have some information in the governance section too. But that's a good place to start to also gather some information about companies of a certain size, because that reporting is going to be out there. It's just that consumers usually don't access it. It's usually investors that access that information.
The other thing that reminds me of, Missy, is there's big institutions that rate companies on their DEI strategies or initiatives. There have been some changes, but if you're looking for a list of just companies that get evaluated positively, Fair 360, even they rebranded. They used to be Diversity Inc. and they would
Right.
put out a top 50 list. They rebranded even like, I don't know, like more than half a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
almost a year ago, actually. They rebranded a year ago to Fair 360 because they saw the writing on the wall and they put so many things behind paywalls now. But they used to come up with this list that is like top 50 companies in diversity and inclusion, or DEI, as the terms have changed. They've been around since the 90s. So you can still find those. Saramount also does one on, they don't just do national, they do global inclusion companies as well. And they also have a list. You can look those up. And they also, both of these organizations do it by topic. Like they'll say like best companies in employee resource groups, best companies in talent management, acquisition, etc. So you can do that. And the other one I like is the HRCI, the
Oh,
Human Rights Corporate
oh,
Equality
I thought it was
Index.
HRC.
HRC.
Let me see.
There's an HARC, that's the Hispanic Association, something else. They also put on an index. HRC.
HRC is the Human Rights Campaign. That's the one I was thinking of.
CEI. Oh my God, everyone, I swear we know these things. I think it was, oh no, HRCI is the Human Recertification. HRC, HRC, CEI. Okay, that's the right one. HRC, CEI. We should probably ask Adrian to edit that.
No, well, regardless, it will be in the show notes. So they'll just, and then the show notes are just like a whole bunch of letters and then be like, haha, figure it out.
Adrian is our video person. Thank you, Adrian. We appreciate you so much. We'll let him know to keep it.
But
Anyway,
go ahead.
HRC CEI has a long list of like an appendix of companies that both support LGBTQ employees in the workplace and that do not. So they send out the survey to a lot of different companies in the Fortune 500 list. And they ask them a series of questions on their support of LGBTQIA employees. And if they don't respond to the survey, they shame them and they remove points from their score and they publish them anyway. So I really like their tactic. I can't believe I forgot their name for like half a second. I swear, this is like things that are in my brain. I did give a disclaimer about how my brain is not working lately.
Yeah,
So
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And I really do think in the show notes, we should just have like letters and that'll be funny.
just scramble it.
Just scramble it. It's like, you figure it out. That's like the name of this episode is You Figure It Out. No, but to be even more confusing, there are then also, right, organizations, which I did mention one, HRC Human Rights Campaign, that have like benchmarking for specific areas, and HRC does benchmarking of companies for LGBTQ issues. So we'll put them in the show notes as well. But I think that's a good place for thinking about, these again are not perfect tracking tools, but they do give you an idea of then companies that have been at least vetted in some way and rated and ranked for what's happening internally to them, that that you can get a better sense that even if they're jettisoning the name, what they have, where they've been ranked and what they've been doing for over the course of many years and many reports.
And that's really important because, to our point earlier, if DEI is embedded in an organization, is really hard to get rid of, because that means that it's embedded in policies, in departments, across departments, in people's titles, in people's work, and you can't get rid of that. And if it's that embedded, that means that it's adding value to an organization in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So you're going to have a hard time convincing people to get rid of something that adds value, especially because a huge reason for these executive orders, right, Missy, is that they are discriminatory. The DEI is discriminatory.
Yep. That's a whole nother ball of wax. Look for, we'll either link it in the show notes or you'll get it soon on like what's going on with that whole term discrimination because um, I'll be writing up a little guidebook for what we mean by discrimination now.
Yeah. Thank you, Missy, for all the good work you do for everyone else. Uh, and so, okay, so what are some reasons why these companies might rebrand, even if they really love DEI? The Trump administration, right? The having to deal with regulatory compliance, which just means that they don't want to even be perceived as potentially breaking the law. Even though there's many different legal resources, and we're compiling them, also will be in the show notes. We're compiling a lot of different legal resources that say, DEI is not discriminatory. It's still supported. A lot of different 16 states, I believe, as of when we recorded this podcast, have attorney generals that have said, keep going with DEI. There's nothing wrong with it. So, but they were still worried about it and they don't want to miss out on government contracts. So it's regulatory compliance. What's a different reason? They might be perceiving backlash from their clients. Like one of the examples I gave earlier is their clients might really be against DEI. And so they have a market base that is going to judge them on the surface level if they have DEI proudly on their website, right? So they're kind of rebranding to do that, change that perception of them. So it could be considered a marketing campaign, a shift
Yeah.
in marketing strategy.
I think also considering that, like, especially private companies that are publicly traded also have a shareholder stake. And even if the executive team and like the, internal to the organization, there's some struggles right now between investors and shareholders and what like internal, right, the C-suite and like everybody internal to the company might want to do in some places too, because there's a lot of back and forth between sometimes what some investors or shareholders want and then what other folks within the organization know is good and possible. And so sometimes rebranding is not just for like a consumer base or this client base, but also because there are constraints based on like who is investing in your company and who has a say from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, not to say that some companies might be rebranding to just shift focus entirely. And that might be a little bit hard to see, but you have resources to kind of track whether they're doing it to shift focus or whether they're doing it just to rebrand. But I think we mentioned this already. Those companies that are doing this rebranding might. We had sorry, before I go down that rabbit hole, we're doing a webinar next month for the American Anthropology Association, which would be really fun and exciting. So we're looking forward to that.
Oh yeah.
I think this is getting published before then. It's on the 20th. Yeah, March 20th.
Yes, March 20th.
So one of the big questions there is we've been talking mostly about corporate, but higher education has been taking a huge hit with this anti-DEI orders. We haven't heard about boycotting higher education. That's not a thing that I know of. But one of the questions that we have gotten around the higher ed rebranding is, if you rebrand, can you still apply for funding? So unclear. I don't know that yet, but I think that's another consideration of why people are rebranding too, is being able to have access to federal resources.
Yeah, and I will say that includes in the private sector where different kinds of research needs to take place. And sometimes you also get private sector entities that either work within or work with higher ed that need to apply for grants, that need to apply for funding to do research on things like cancer, right? That need to do like research on, environmental factors that need to do all kinds of different like research across a lot of different sectors. But right now, that's also part of a consideration for different kinds of research and development, whether it's a higher ed partnership or not. But that's another like reason of, why you see this rebranding. And I do want to take a second and just, again, reiterate, we really need to look at what companies, organizations are doing and what they're committed to rather than just the headlines of what they are saying, because that's really the critical point here. Because there's just a lot of different factors and reasons why people might be quote unquote jettisoning DEI. And if you take nothing else away from this podcast, then one, you can take away one, we're trying to confuse you. No, I'm kidding. Right. And two, right, that this really is the ground is moving underneath folks' feet. And some of them are using it as an opportunity to actually jettison DEI, and some of them are just like trying to roll with it.
Yeah. And the stakes for them are really high, right? If they make a wrong mistake, like there's no clear win-win solution here. They have to outweigh the risk versus the benefits. And some of the risk that I'm sure they're outweighing is, losing customers, losing employees, dealing with loss of morale, and a lot of reasons. So before we jump to condemned organizations that are not on pro DEI list, I think it's important to know that they are, dealing with trying to figure things out at a time when there aren't really clear solutions. And it's unfortunately up to us to kind of figure out, if we are participating in a boycott, to do a little bit of extra research on it before committing firmly to those organizations and potentially being part of the problem if we don't understand fully what it means to be committed to DEI.
I couldn't agree with you more. And just remember, there's a history of changing the name of the thing that we're doing, but still doing the work under different umbrellas. And so that part is not new, but we're just asking you all who might be considering participating in this boycott to do one more step of kind of research before you send your money to A or B, so that, as Lucy said, you are absolutely being part of supporting the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, rather than kind of inadvertently contributing to, its demise.
No, you alone do not hold the power to get rid of
so much
DEI,
power,
but you all collectively do.
Yeah, and it's an important moment to understand the changing landscape as much as we can. So just be a little cautious about where you're putting your money so that it's supporting the thing that you want it to support. Because I know that there's a lot of really great intentions with doing this, and I want to make sure that the money is going to where you want it to go to do the thing you want it to do, and that's support diversity, equity, and inclusion.
In whatever way, shape, or form that is taken up right now.
Yep.
Do you think that concludes our episode of You Figure It Out?
I think it does. So everyone, you figure it out. No, I'm kidding. Hopefully we confused the issue, but helped you figure out how to navigate something that is a complex issue in a way that is useful.
Sorry, I'm still laughing.
Lucy's laughing at me. And then nobody will ever take a class with me ever. They're just like, don't worry. The whole point of the class is to make it more confusing. You're welcome.
Yeah, and that sums up anthropology in one sentence.
The end.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Let us know, actually, if you have any questions about what we should be talking about on these podcasts. It'd be nice to know. I mean, we have such a long list already, but please it is helpful getting any feedback. And I guess I could do a plug for all of our stuff. So we have Inclusive Culture Strategy, where you can learn more. We have a 50% off. Did I say that at the last episode?
I
The
don't
Trump
remember.
special. We have a Trump special. If you are unemployed or underemployed because of Trump's executive orders, we're doing 50% off of our courses. So take a look, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time, everyone, where we will confuse you again.
Bye.
In solidarity. Bye, everyone.